Welcome to Be a Better Leader. I'm Jeffrey Downs, Managing Director at Franklin Covey, the world's most trusted leadership company. Today, we're exploring how leaders can ensure that their team members feel empowered and motivated to contribute their best during times of change. Joining me again is Marché Pleshette, one of Franklin Covey's senior consultants and co-author of Change, How to Turn Uncertainty into Opportunity. Marché, it is great to be talking with you again.
It is always a joy to be here with you, Jeff. Thank you.
Well, fantastic. Well, I'm excited about our topic today because we get to go a little bit deeper into the change model. Last time we were talking about communicating the change. This time we get to go into the change model and explore that a little bit further. So to get us started, Marché, let review the principles or the ideas, the steps in the change model for us so we're all starting on that same page.
Sure. So we know that there's a predictable pattern of change, and it doesn't matter what it is, what the change is, where it comes from. There's this predictable pattern.
Yeah.
And to explain it, if you can imagine, we call it the zone of status quo, where it's business as usual. We are masters of whatever it is that we're doing. We feel confident about it. We could probably do it with our eyes closed. There are some pros and cons to that, but status quo is that. And then when change actually happens, we get into the zone of disruption because something is changing. And again, no matter how great the change is, it's going to be it's going to be a slope. If you can imagine, we talk about the change curve, and I'll probably mention this again as we're talking. But status quo, it's a flat line. When there's the zone of when there's disruption that happens, when the change is introduced, it's going to drop. We're going to have a drop in results, and that
Mhm.
results could be, you know, the quality of what we're doing. The results could be satisfaction. It could be employee satisfaction. It could be impact that we have in whatever it is that we do. And it also impacts time, right? So things are going to take a little bit longer as we get acclimated to whatever the change is.
Mhm.
So before I go any further, and I hope everybody's following, but before I go any further, really the goal and understanding that there's this pattern of change is managing this curve. So we just went
Okay.
down in the zone of
Yeah.
disruption. In the zone of disruption, people have questions. They're kind of talking about things. It's changing speed, costs, all kinds of things, and we kind of hang around there until we get enough information to feel confident enough to really indulge in the change.
Okay.
We call that the point of decision. It's a pivotal point in change because until we get there, we're just going to talk about it and kind of grumble about it, or maybe like just do passive things with it, but we're not really in. When we get through that, and I call it a thoroughfare, the point of decision, it takes us into the zone of adoption. And the zone of adoption is where people say, okay, I'm going to try, I'm going to opt in. And in the zone of adoption, we're trying, but it's no guarantee that it's going to just be smooth sailing because we'd like to think that this curve is now going up, and it should be, but it's more like a squiggly line. We call it the spaghetti bowl, if you can imagine that, because
Yeah.
it's not necessarily smooth. It's a lot of things that's happening, ideas, things that we're playing with, trying, a lot of feelings that are going up and down, right? So that's the zone of adoption. And then if we could get through it, if we could keep going and we can be perseverant in the zone of adoption, it really is taking us up because we're mastering, learning, and we're getting to better. And it's not as hard to do whatever the change has, that was imposed perhaps, or
Mhm.
maybe that we even thought of ourselves. We get to a point where it's like, okay, I got this. This is not so hard. And we get into the zone of innovation.
Wow.
And the zone of innovation is where either one of two things should happen. We look around to see, like, it took a lot to get through change. Let's leverage that and see if we could get a little bit more out of it. And so it requires us to explore and figure out, what's possible that we could do that wasn't necessarily possible or even planned before the change was introduced. And at the very least, it's where we really reflect on what have we learned in the in going through this that has made us better in getting through change and has caused us to level up. So
Mm,
that's the change model: status
mm.
quo, disruption, adoption, and innovation.
One of the things as you were explaining the change model, in my mind, I saw when you talked about the point of decision. That seems to be, and I'm going to postulate something and you can correct and make it what it needs to be.
Okay.
But that seems to be the place where I, as if I'm in this as an employee, I'm following someone that's introducing this change. The point of decision is where I feel empowered to make a decision to move forward. Is that so? I'm postulating that, but is that kind of what that is, or is there something more to it?
I think that we could use that word empowered. I have been using the word we're confident enough to try and
Okay.
participate in the change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense because so what I hear is in the area of disruption, I'm trying to figure all this out, and as a leader, and so this is where I think my next question goes to. During that period of disruption, that's incumbent on a leader to be able to help a person get to that point of decision, to be able to be confident to make that decision. Am I right in that, or is that
You are spot on. It
okay?
is very much, and there's some things that need to happen in status quo, actually, for a leader to prepare themselves to be able to do what you've just expressed in the zone of disruption. But yes,
Yeah.
it is a leader's responsibility to really get our team members um, confident enough and comfortable enough to move forward and to get to that point of decision. You just made me think about something, Jeff. I was doing a class recently, and a participant asked the question, "But what if you don't?" And this was a leader, by the way. And
Uh-huh.
so we take leaders through the change process like everybody else, leading yourself through change, and then we talk to them about leading others through change. But it's interesting because the leader said, "But what if you don't really agree with the change yourself? How do you get to the point of decision and get into the zone of adoption?" And
That is a great question.
yes, it really was, because I think as leaders, sometimes we feel a little bit resistant. We have, feelings about the change ourselves. And one of the things, what I shared with him was that it's just so important for us to get as clear as we can in in when disruption happens. Get as much information as you can. It doesn't mean that you're going to agree. It doesn't mean that you're going to like it or that you 100% buy into it, but it means that you understand it enough to say, all right, I don't love it, but I'm in being a part of what has
Mm,
been the directive I've been given to navigate
yeah.
this change.
What I hear and I love about that is I have a responsibility if I'm in the leadership chair to do whatever it is that I can to understand completely what the change is, why the change is happening, so that then I can answer those questions. I may not agree with it, like you said, but I then have the ability to communicate with my team members what the change is and how it works, to have as much possible information to share with them so that they then can feel empowered to be able to make their decision or to have the confidence to make that decision.
Yes, yes. So you're following this absolutely. And I want to take us one step back to make this easier for people who are listening. When we're in status quo as leaders, it's so important. Two things in status quo, when things are just lovely, we all know change is still coming, right? It's like it's
That's
kind
a
of quiet,
guarantee. We've got
right?
change on the horizon.
That's the truth. And I always call it vigilant relaxation, if you will. So it's like we don't want to be alarmist and have people thinking, change is coming. But we as leaders want to keep our ear to the ground, always be thinking about what's happening in our industries, what's happening, in terms of regulations as it relates to whatever you do in your field, keeping up with, just keeping up with things. So just one, that's our responsibility as leaders. And two, we as leaders get information before our team members, right? That's how it typically works. And even as leaders, sometimes, so as leaders, sometimes it's given to us, so we don't understand everything. So we got to get some clarity ourselves, right? Um, in the zone of status quo, before when we get some clarity that change is going to happen and it's coming up and we haven't shared it yet, we got to get we've got to create a compelling story for when we do introduce this.
Mm,
So it's almost the art of storytelling.
mm,
So it's important for us to find out for ourselves as leaders, okay, so what exactly does this mean for me as a leader? What is this going to mean for my team? What is it that we are doing now that we'll be doing differently? How, how might this look in a year? How might this look in 3? So we've got to think about all of these things and also process what are your curious questions and what might theirs be. So get a compelling story
mm.
before in the zone of status quo before you ever share it, because it's our colleague Curtis Bateman explains this, and I've adapted it because it makes so much sense. It's almost like as leaders in the zone of status quo, we're there in the zone of status quo, and we're on a ladder. We're leaders. We're on a ladder, and we could see. I wish people could see me pointing, but we could see
Right.
innovation. Like we could see where we're wanting people to go, but they don't see that yet. And so we've got to be thinking, how do I illustrate? I'm a little bit higher, and how do I illustrate for them what they don't see yet?
Mm,
So we've got to be thinking about that and getting that together, because when we tell them, now we're in the zone of disruption, it's kind of like this roller coaster just went down. It's like I
yeah.
want to. People start to feel insecure. They feel a little fearful. People. One of the biggest things is people are mostly concerned. Am I going to have a job? Is this going to, what does this mean about how I'm going to be doing my work? And it's like it's a cost. It's almost. I've been calling it. It's like it's an economy. It's an
Mm,
economics of
yeah.
change, right?
Yeah.
And so we've got to help people get through, as you were originally asking, in the zone of disruption by having done our own due diligence before we even share it with them.
I, so that strategy, the before we ever get there, is one strategy. To what I look at is be able to maintain motivation and engagement during the prolonged periods of change. What
Yes.
add to that? What are some of the other strategies that I can use as a leader to be able to help people continue through this change?
Yes. So, okay, change has been introduced. Our team members didn't have anything to do with it. And and they feel that way. Like you're just telling us things are changing and so they feel like change has been imposed upon them if we don't manage that carefully, right?
Hmm.
So, one of the keys is to get them engaged in the change, which means we got to get them involved in the change and they've got to feel like they have some not so the truth of the matter is like when change has been introduced, like it's been talked about, it has been analyzed, strategized, like it's not going back. Typically we're going to do what we said we were going to do, but how that rolls out, we need them for that. And we've got to engage them in that, which means that we got to ask some questions about what do you think can work? What have you found, that is working well? What have you found that doesn't? Who's having some success with this? How did you get to that? And then it's going to be important for us. I mentioned, you know, so now you're asking about like how do we keep them in a process of change? So now let's say we got past the point of decision, we're in the zone of adoption. So I
Yeah.
want you to follow me. We're there.
Right. Right.
So in the zone of adoption, and we should have started that also in the zone of disruption, getting them to think about how they can play a part, what ideas do they have, because that helps them to buy in also.
You bet.
But in the zone of adoption, it really is like this is action time. And we've got to try some things to make it work. So we engage them by celebrating small wins, asking them, what they think, what they would do differently. it's important for us in that process for us to let them know that we're in it with them. And I want to go back. I said that too casually. Celebrate small wins. Like, do not wait till it's all over to celebrate, to say thank you. Keep a scoreboard so people can see we're getting there,
Right.
and
Right.
and to figure out what's working in that process. Um, there's something else that I think that I should mention. A McKinsey study actually shows that over 70% of most change initiatives fail to reach the
Wow.
goal that was originally or as originally planned. That's a lot of change that didn't go the way people expected.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow.
And the change failure typically happens in when people are trying in the zone of adoption in that spaghetti bowl. It
Yeah.
typically happens there. And it happens there because it gets frustrating when I've tried this and it does not work, or, I did this and you said that so it really is. I've mentioned before in the previous interview that we did together,
Yeah. Yeah.
that change is really a human phenomenon. It really
Yeah.
is all about uh,
Yeah.
the people part. So in the zone of adoption, we got to help people persist.
Right.
We've got to be
Right.
encouraging. We've got to acknowledge where people are challenged. We've got to be encouraging. It's all of those things. And as leaders, that's some people stuff. And as I
Yeah.
always say, it's people stuff, but it's not just soft skills. These are power skills that help
Ooh,
people propel forward.
love that. These power skills. Okay. Again, you and I could continue this conversation. Unfortunately, we're limited by time. I've got one more question just as we finish up here. So, and it relates to something that you said. People often feel that this change was done to me. I didn't really have anything to do with this. I just am now a recipient of this change. So the question is how can leaders balance the need for stability and structure with a change initiative with the need for empowering and flexibility during the change? In other words, as now I have the change, is there some impact, some input that I can have on this change, or do I just have to accept what is?
Yeah. I think it is very much tied to what I've just shared. I think that it is making sure that people do know while they didn't come up with the change, they are absolutely a part of the change. And we inspire them to try some things. And as leaders, like, we don't want to invite mistakes, but give them the word that you used earlier, empower them to try, right? And not make it punitive when it doesn't work. Like,
Yeah.
to be encouraging. So that could be helpful. And the other thing that I would say is, as people are trying and they're doing different things, we should probably be a bit flexible with, there are some things that maybe they don't need to focus on as much. Maybe there are some meetings that they aren't the ones, or they don't need to attend like they used to. So we've got
Yeah.
to be adaptable. Those are some flexibilities that they could have, and we could afford
Right.
them
Right.
when they can't really change the change. We can actually be a bit flexible with that. And I think that that is inspiring to people.
Marche, your insights are absolutely invaluable. I appreciate them and appreciate you being on the podcast today. If you're interested, to our listeners out there, in learning more about how you can empower your team during a period of change, you can download our free guide, The Energy of Change: 5 Leadership Behaviors to Drive Collective Action in a Fluid Landscape. You'll find a link to that in the show notes, or visit franklincovey.com for more information and resources. Marche, again, thank you so much. And for everyone else, we hope that you have a wonderful, not only day, but also adventure in your striving to become a better leader.